Good afternoon and welcome to the Southern University Law Center, one of the most effective, diverse, and community-centric law centers in the nation. I am Alfreda Tillman Bester. I am Special Counsel for Human Services at Southern University Law Center's Vulnerable Communities and Peoples Initiative. This is our fourth and final in a series of designed to bring clarity to our community regarding the 2021 legislative session and extraordinary veto session that followed. Southern University Law Center would like to thank our partners in this endeavor, the Louisiana Progress and the National Association of Social Workers, Louisiana chapter. Today, we are looking ahead to the 2022 legislative session with a focus on redistricting and much, much more. But first, I would like to ask our brilliant Chancellor, John Pierre, to come and welcome our guests and attendees to the Southern University Law Center.
Thank you. Thank you very, very, very much. First of all, I definitely am very, very honored that we have such a great panel to talk about a very, very important set of issues relating to voting rights, redistricting. These are extremely important issues for several reasons. One, without the vote, we have no access to power and justice. This is extremely important. And when we go back to the efforts made by many Southern University Law Center alums to help secure voting rights, we always place that at the top of our priorities for purposes of educational, learning opportunities, and service opportunities. And in this regard, I want to talk about two things here. One, this is the 35th anniversary of a lawsuit filed by a Southern University Law Center alum, Judge Janice Clark, which basically secured voting rights and changed the way we elect judges in the state of Louisiana, such that Louisiana has now the highest percentage of African-American district court judges and appellate court judges in the nation. So this is an example of how important voting is. Her work, along with the work of Ernest Johnson and others, extremely important from that standpoint. The second part is that Louisiana will be going through a redistricting process that will begin in early next year. And Judge Clark is teaching a voting rights class for us now in collaboration with Professor Ernest Johnson. So we're teaching voting rights and redistricting issues to a whole new group of students, and they have almost 30 students that are learning about this particular process. As we can see across the nation, elections matter. They matter in so many different ways. And this discussion today will be a vibrant discussion about why it's important to understand these issues, what these maps mean, why we have to have voter participation, and because it is essential to a vibrant democracy. And that is a critical piece of this whole discussion. We want democracies to be very, very well treasured. And we have an opportunity in this nation to have the largest multiracial democracy in this country, in this world. So we have to fight to preserve that and to create that bridge for us to continue that for the next generations to come. So again, thank you for participating. Thank you, Attorney Alfreda Tillman Bester, my former law student, for having the vision to create this series and put this on the agenda for discussion. And I want to thank all the attendees that are coming to listen to this very important topic.
Thank you so much, Chancellor. We really appreciate your support and your encouragement. Today, as we said, we are bringing you a discussion on redistricting after the 2020 census. What will voting rights look like here in Louisiana and around the country? What role will our elected representatives play in protecting our rights to vote and to have our votes count, right? Without interposition and nullification by people who are no longer even trying to hide their lawless efforts to suppress our votes. In 1965, the United States Congress passed and President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That act assured that all Americans had equal access to the polls without political or racist interference and without threat of physical harm or death. But in 2013, the United States Supreme Court, in a case called Shelby County versus Holder, held that it was unconstitutional to use the coverage formula in the Voting Rights Act to determine which jurisdictions are subject to what we call preclearance. And you'll be hearing more about preclearance in just a bit. But subject to the preclearance requirement that was in Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. The effect of Shelby County was that the Voting Rights Act was essentially, and here's a legal term that you guys should write down, gutted. And the ink on that decision was not even dry before we started seeing voter suppression efforts all over the nation, all the way up to and including the 2020 presidential election, where nullification was placed on steroids, trying to nullify the votes, particularly of people in the African American community. And then we had an insurrection. So if you didn't think that this was a serious matter, I think that the January 6, 2021 made an indelible mark on everyone in this nation, and voter suppression efforts still persist. Our wonderful, generous panel today includes, y'all, I got so many friends on this panel, I'm gonna not just call everybody friends, right? So Representative Randall Gaines, who represents the District 57 in Laplace, and St. John the Baptist, and what's the other parish? Okay.
St. Charles.
St. Charles Parish. See, I just went completely blank. Representative Royce Duplessis, who has not yet joined us, but he is on his way, who represents District 93 out of New Orleans. Ms. Alanah Odoms, who is the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU of Louisiana. Ms. Ashley Shelton, powerhouse extraordinary, that's her title. Founder and president and CEO of the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. Mr. Stephen Kearny, co-founder of Fair Districts Louisiana. Mr. Michael Pernick, who is the Redistricting Counsel for the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. My friend, Terry Landry, who is, I'm sorry, let me fix that. Terry Landry Jr., who is Louisiana Policy Director with the Southern Poverty Law Center. And my friend, Peter Robbins Brown, Policy and Advocacy Director at Louisiana Progress. We will start by giving each of our panelists 5 to 6 minutes to introduce themselves and to talk about their work around redistricting. And Representative Gaines, I'd like to start with you, and you can pick it up wherever you want. I know that everybody has lots that they want to contribute. My only thing is, to all of you lawyers, stay within your 5 to 6 minutes. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, I'll make sure I adhere to your stipulations, Ms. Bester. I represent St. John Parish. I also serve as the vice chair of the National Board for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SPLC, the organization that was led by Dr. King until 1968. The organization, of course, that led the charge to pass the Voting Rights Act in 1965. So I have a very personal interest in this matter, not only because I like to fight for the interests of minorities and those in any race who was disenfranchised, but because of the heritage of the organization that I've worked so hard to continue to advance the mission that Dr. King started. This redistricting process is the most important political action we're going to undertake in 2021, 2022. It's a process that involves opportunities, but it's also a process that's going to involve significant risk and challenges and opportunities for us to create balanced districts, give us opportunity to make sure that all sectors of our society are represented, make sure that our minorities, disenfranchised, are adequately represented. And as you know, we haven't always had proportionality in terms of our ability to elect representatives of our communities. And as it stands currently in Louisiana, we don't necessarily have proportionate adequately represented districts that allow minorities to be elected to represent their constituents in a fair way, particularly in the instances of the state Supreme Court and Congress. As you know, Louisiana, the population of Louisiana is about 1/3 minority, 1/3 Black. We only have 1 out of 7 justices on the state Supreme Court, and we only have 1 out of 6 representing minorities in Congress. This is certainly not a representative scenario. We have an opportunity to change that. We have an opportunity to address that in redistricting. We also have an opportunity to make sure that we can create balanced districts, districts that do not have a supermajority makeup, supermajority districts, districts that are dominated by one race or another. It eliminates the ability for many people in our society and our state to be able to have influence in a district. In many cases, it minimizes it, and in many cases, it neutralizes it totally for them to have influence in their directing the direction of their communities. And now the challenges, of course, is this is the first time we're undertaking redistricting without the benefit of the Voting Rights Act in the last 50 years. A very precarious proposition. As you know, as Ms. Bester said, the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965. Prior to the passage of the Voting Rights Act, only 10% of minorities, 10% of African Americans in the Deep South were able to vote. 1% in Shelby County, where the Selma movement took place. Only 1% of Blacks were able to vote. After the Voting Rights Act was passed, of course, within 6 months, they registered 450,000 Blacks to vote within 6 months after the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. It changed the political landscape for Blacks. At the time it was passed, there were no Blacks in the Deep South serving in state legislatures. By 1990, there were 109 serving, and by the year 2010, there were over 300 Blacks serving in state legislatures. So it changed the political landscape. That's been eviscerated by the Supreme Court striking down, making a supreme error and striking down Section 4B of the Voting Rights Act, which is a pre-clearance formula. So we're in a really vulnerable position. So I'm concerned about going into redistricting. I'm optimistic about the opportunity, but I'm also concerned about the risk involved going to redistricting without the benefit of the Voting Rights Act. And as Ms. Bester said, now there's always been a pushback for the last 50 years, there's been a pushback to Black political progress. There's been a backlash to the Civil Rights Movement. It was subtle in the 70s, subtle in the 80s, a little bit more aggressive in the 90s, and now it's open and notorious, and as she said, it's on steroids. We have a total, our country is now facing the most, I would say the most dangerous, the most adverse pushback against voting rights in the last 60 years. And it's all under the disguise of the false narrative of voter fraud. Right now, as of August 1st, 18 states had already passed 30 laws to disenfranchise Black votes. And the problem and the challenge with that is that we are now facing a situation where we have a federal court system that was designed to protect voting rights that are now creating a pathway for pervasive and for widespread voting rights infringement, particularly with the Supreme Court's decision in Shelby, the Supreme Court's decision in the Maryland North Carolina case in which they had white flag gerrymandering, and the recent Supreme Court in the Arizona court case, which makes it more difficult for blacks or minorities to challenge discriminatory voting laws. So we're facing very grave challenges. As I said, there's opportunities, but we also need to be prepared to overcome the challenges that we are facing, not only in the legislature, but in the court system. But thank you very much, and I'll yield to the rest of the panel.
With 30 seconds left.
I think you're muted.
Thank you. I want to now welcome our Representative Royce Duplessis to our group. And with Representative Duplessis, we're going to give you about 5 to 6 minutes to talk about redistricting, to introduce yourself, and to talk about your work around redistricting. So your time starts now. Welcome.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everybody. I'm honored to have been asked to serve on this very important panel. I'm honored to see so many wonderful people who are advocating for forward progress of this state. I want to thank Louisiana Progress and all the other organizations who came together to have this very timely discussion. My name is Royce Duplessis. I serve as state representative for District 93, which is the innermost part of New Orleans. A lot of familiar neighborhoods like Treme, 7th Ward, French Quarter, Central Business District, Lower Garden District, Central City, Lower Mid City. Been serving in this capacity now since the spring of 2018 and was reelected in the fall of 2019 to a full term. So I'm serving my first full term. I currently serve on the Commerce Committee as well as House and Governmental Affairs, where I serve as vice chair. So I will be intimately involved in the redistricting process just by nature of the fact that the bills are going to come through the House and Governmental Affairs Committee as well as the Senate and Governmental Affairs Committee. So I just want to sort of point out the obvious, despite the fact that my colleague Randall Gaines can speak so knowledgeably about this. Very few of us have ever gone through the redistricting process. But hearing Representative Gaines talk, I mean, he knows the process, and he can just speak about it from a level much more detail than I can. But I'm going to talk about it just more from the viewpoint of a legislator in terms of the practical impacts of the way our state is currently laid out versus what we need to be pushing for the next map in terms of just the practical implications. All right, let's just start with the fact that our state is made up of 40% minorities, okay? Everybody who's on this call right now knows that the legislature is not made up of 40% minority, okay? So that's sort of just a starting point. How do we, as legislators, draw the map in a way that most accurately reflects the people who elected us? But before we even get to that point, I think the question should be raised for purposes of this discussion: should we even be drawing the maps? Should we even be drawing the maps? We know that there are other states that are pushing independent commissions. So that's a question that I think needs to be answered. We will be drawing the maps this time around because Louisiana has not been receptive to the idea of nonpartisan independent commissions, and those certainly have their politics involved as well. But, at the end of the day, this is all about power. It's all about achieving a majority, right? For those who have the ability to draw maps in a way that will not just preserve their majority, but ensure that the other side has no chance to move their agenda forward. That is what the process has become, as I understand it, despite the fact that I've never been through redistricting before. These are very, very high stakes we're talking about. And if you look at what's going on in other states already, states like Texas, and some of the maps that they're putting out, we absolutely in Louisiana have every reason to be concerned, and we need to be vigilant and as actively involved in the process as possible. I believe that my role in this process will be, as I've already pointed out, is to work to ensure that we have districts that look like the districts, not drawn in some real weird or funny way, but making sure that communities of interest are represented and that people have an opportunity to have their voices heard. I think one of the most glaring examples of how redistricting impacts the everyday livelihood of Louisianians is the fact that you have probably over 75% of Louisianians who support the idea of something like, say, raise the minimum wage. But the fact that that type of policy can't even make it out of committee tells you that the way that it's set up is very imbalanced. And when we don't have districts that fairly represent the makeup of this state, that's problematic. So I think the goal should be that we have districts that look like the state. Public participation is going to be crucial. Next week, we are starting our road show. We're going to be in Monroe, then we're going to be heading over to Shreveport. I can't stress enough how important it is for residents, citizens, voters from all corners of the state to show up, to be active, make points, also ask questions. As we go into this process that I believe is going to start sometime in February. We don't have a hard date yet, but we're going to be looking at, based on conversations internally and publicly, we're looking at some time in February where we can begin the redistricting process. But public participation is going to be crucial. It's really going to be everything. I know that there's some really, really smart people on this call who are going to talk about this process from all different facets, from the legal side, from the data side. But I just kind of wanted to talk about it a little bit from the standpoint of a legislator, and the fact that we have so little compromise in today's policymaking. It has led to gridlock, and it has led to an ineffective government. And redistricting is at the heart of that gridlock, because when elected leaders feel like they don't have to listen to competing views, other views get shut out, special interests gain more power, and we have a broken system. So this is crucial. So if you're on this call, you probably understand that already, and that's why you're on the call. But we're not here to preach to the choir. We have to go and be advocates to those who may not understand the importance of redistricting, and activate those to be more involved and to understand the importance of it. Because until we have the ability to compromise in policymaking, we won't ever get anything done. So I'll end my comments there. And again, thank you all for allowing me to be a part of this discussion.
Thank you so very much, Representative Duplessis. That was very helpful and very informative. He talked about really bright people being on this panel. And let me just introduce you to one, Alanah Odoms, who is definitely one of the very smart people on this panel. Alanah is the executive director of the Louisiana ACLU, and she is a fighter. So she's going to be one of those people that's going to be in court when if those districts don't look like they're supposed to. Welcome, Alanah Odoms.
Oh, thank you for that beautiful introduction, Alfreda, and thank you, Rep. Duplessis, and also Rep. Gaines, for giving us a really wonderful introduction into the significance of this process that we're about to undergo. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a once in a decade opportunity that we have in the state of Louisiana to address voting rights. And we've seen across the country that voting rights are urgently under attack across this country. We've seen all kinds of attempts to curtail the right to vote, especially in the context of the COVID pandemic, not providing opportunities for people to utilize absentee ballots, the moving of polling locations, shutting down of polling locations, all kinds of curtailments to early voting, everything that you could imagine. And these obstacles to voting are really just an extension of the early obstacles to voting that our ancestors experienced before the Voting Rights Act. So what those things used to look like were poll taxes and literacy tests and grandfather clauses that looked a lot like if you didn't have land and you didn't have grandparents who could vote, you couldn't vote. And so we don't have those really insidious things anymore, but we have all kinds of other obstacles to the ballot that we have all seen front and center, especially with the COVID pandemic and in the last 2 years. What has been less seen, though, is this process of redistricting that has traditionally been a process that has not involved public participation. It has traditionally taken place within the confines of the legislature, among the members of House and Governmental and Senate Governmental Affairs, but it's largely been a Baton Rouge in the building kind of private process that consists of individuals, demographers, those are people who draw maps, elected leaders, and the governor, making really private kinds of decisions about the ways that our districts will look. And what districts are we talking about? So we are talking about our congressional districts. We're also talking about our state legislature, so both on the House and the Senate side. We're also talking about the districts of the Louisiana Supreme Court. And we're also talking about districts in the Public Service Commission. So as you can see, we are talking about a myriad of different avenues and different places where districts are going to be redrawn. And I started out by saying this is a once in a decade opportunity because this process only happens after the census, and the census takes place once a decade. And whatever we do in this process, it will be static and cannot be changed for the next decade. So if we in fact recreate maps that model inequity in our voting districts, which means basically we don't account for the ways in which our population has shifted, that means those changes stay in place for 10 years. And so that means I have a 7-year-old little girl. She will be voting age by the time that we get the chance to draw these districts again. So we are going to be looking at changes that are long lasting. And so what population shifts are we considering? What has happened in the state since the last time that we had the opportunity to draw districts? Well, there's been a huge shift in population. There has been an increase in African American and minority voting age population. And interestingly, there has been a converse or inverse decrease in the amount of non-Black or white population. And so when you have increased population of minority people, that means we're not suggesting that you should have districts that look exactly the same way that population shift either increases or decreases, but it should be representative, right? And so we should see increased representative for minorities, and we should see that representation be able to impact the ways our communities are represented in those districts. So to be very plain, I want to give you an example, something from my own personal background that I think really demonstrates this point that we're trying to make. So both Royce Duplessis and I have shared career history of working at the Louisiana Supreme Court. We both had the opportunity to work for Chief Justice Johnson. I still call her the chief. She's my forever chief. And so that's my story and I'm sticking to it. But how did the chief become the Chief Justice of the Louisiana Supreme Court? First African-American woman in the court's 200-year history to ever hold that position. That came from a voting rights case in the 1980s that was filed by Ron Chisholm and a group of other incredible stalwart civil rights plaintiffs in New Orleans to challenge the way that the first Supreme Court district was drawn. Why? Because the district included New Orleans, but also included Plaquemines Parish, pieces of Jefferson Parish, and other majority white parishes that would do what? Dilute the voting power of African Americans in Orleans Parish. And how do we know that that is true? We know because prior to that voting rights case, for 179 years, the court had never elected a person of color. And when the regression analysis were done and the demographers and all the other very statistical, very smart people who are currently involved in this process did those analyses, they predicted that if in fact the districts were not redrawn and if the New Orleans community was not protected as a community of interest, that there never would be a person of color to ever serve on the court. And so what we know is that case, that voting rights case, it was a Section 2 voting rights case, a vote dilution case. But what we know is that litigation is but one means to be able to push back against racial gerrymandering, which is essentially what we know. Our state of Louisiana is the 6th most racially gerrymandered state in the nation. So the courts are one way we do that. And you'll hear from Michael Pernick and other dynamic voting rights lawyers who are going to be taking this case to the court if we need to go there. But first, we have an amazing opportunity as a state, as populations in the state of Louisiana, to advocate, to hold our legislators accountable in this process, and to participate in these roadshows that are going to be taking place all across the state. So ACLU of Louisiana, in partnership with Power Coalition, Louisiana Progress, Fair Districts, all of us, community partners working together, are going to be doing some really important preparation. So we're going to be helping community members prepare to testify. And we're also going to be holding some in-person events that are going to take place next week in Monroe and in Shreveport to nourish, encourage, empower, and really just fellowship around this important process and why we need to participate. So if you want to know more about how to get involved, if you want to testify, but you're just not sure how, you're just not sure about how to craft your testimony, you want somebody to help you analyze these population shifts and think about, wait, is my community impacted? Are the districts in my community ones that are going to be experiencing these very large shifts? And how do I make my interest known? We can all help you do that. And you can go to the ACLU.org website to find out how you can become a part of our voter action team. But
so I told y'all she was brilliant.
Did.
And
passionate.
No,
I'm done. I'm done.
So there's passion. There's so much passion on this panel that I'm having. I don't want to stop any of
No, stop me. But I hope, I'm so glad. I'm so excited to be here. I can't wait to hear from our other panelists. That's it for me.
Thank you, Alanah. Alanah mentioned poll taxes, and I want to just give you just a little. We in poll taxes way back when y'all got to pay $10, $12 to come and vote. Well, there was a case just out of Florida this week where a woman who was a formerly incarcerated person was told that she had to pay over $50,000 in order to be able to exercise her right as a United States citizen to vote in this nation. The more things change, the more they remain the same. I talked about passion, but one of the things that Alanah emphasized was we're going to have to participate on the front end, but we also have to be ready to fight. We have to be ready to fight. And so as I introduce my next fighter, Miss Ashley Shelton, I will tell you that we are absolutely preparing for the fight. Miss Ashley Shelton, again, is the founder, president, and CEO of Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. And Ashley, come and tell us what we need to do to prepare for the fight.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Alfreda, and Louisiana Progress, the SPLC team, and certainly all of my colleagues. This is an important topic. We've got to talk about it. I saw in the comments someone was saying that they're excited that we're actually framing this from a power perspective. And I think, for many of us, we know this is the North Star of power in our state, and how and in what ways, who has voice and who doesn't. And I think one of the things that's, most important about, the point that Alanah just made about Louisiana being the 6th most gerrymandered state is that what it means is that there are minorities in our state that cannot elect a candidate of choice. And so as we think about what is all of, what are all the things that this means? One of the most important pieces is that what we're trying to get to is to unpack these, some districts that, have high percentages of one race or the other. And then also too, same thing, unpacking and dealing with the districts where they crack the power of minority voters. And so this is about folks having the ability to elect a candidate of choice. And I think that that's why we need you to get involved. And so Power Coalition for Equity and Justice, we are a civic engagement table here in the state of Louisiana. We work to engage infrequent voters of color across the state. This particular opportunity with redistricting, we know will be critical to have community voice involved in the process because we do not have Section 5 in place. As Alfreda mentioned, it will be critical that there is community participation, that you are submitting testimony on the record, that you are drawing maps. There are lots of tools on our website at powercoalition.org. So there's Dave's Redistricting app, which is, you can Google it. It's available to everyone. Get with your community, because one of the things that we know is that there's several tools in the toolbox that we can use. You know, the roadshow is starting October 20th in Monroe and will run through the end of January, ending in Baton Rouge. I'll drop the slide with those dates in it in the chat shortly, but what we need is for your participation. And so ACLU has come up with a great, kind of form for like how to help put your testimony together. We're working on some sample testimony around some of the opportunity districts that exist across the state of Louisiana, because believe it or not, I mean, there's 6 opportunity districts that exist if we were to be able to conquer, gerrymandering and give actual voice to minority communities throughout the state of Louisiana. And so we're developing that testimony as well as training. And so I dropped in the chat a little while ago, there'll be a training in Monroe. And I'm excited to partner with all the folks on the phone, like on the line here today, to be, just beginning the process of training, educating, and preparing people to participate in the process. We are working with demographer Tony Fairfax. He's available to, to community and to others to help folks get out of the idea that they have to be expert map drawers, but it's really about this idea of communities of interest. And so it's one of our strongest, most powerful tools. And communities of interest can be both by race. And so it can be that you want to keep a African-American community intact for any number of reasons, or it could also be around issues. And so we know our friends in the river parishes, they may want to become a community of interest around environmental justice issues. And so there's lots of ways that we can use the community of interest tool to be able to help communities think about, like, why does this one resource need to remain in our community? Why do I live in one district, but my neighbor lives in another district, right? Like these ideas of like, what does it actually mean to keep your communities together? What assets and resources will your community have access to? And then also too, again, will you be able to elect a candidate of choice? And to Royce's point, if we could elect candidates of choice, then when we know for sure, one, we've tested with a conservative polling firm, we know that 65% of the state of Louisiana wants a fair and equitable redistricting process. This has been, tested and polled across the state. We know 80% of folks want more. 82% actually want, a living wage. And the reality is that we always keep coming up against that we don't have the political leadership to do the work of the people. And so this is about having your chance and opportunity to have your voice. We have trained over 300 folks through our crowd academies to be able to learn all the terms, to be able to learn how to map. We will be doing some additional crowd academies. Again, I will make sure to share that with the partners here on the phone so that we can push that out so that folks will know if you want a deep intensive training that you can do that. Crowd academies it's redistricting school. So it's where we teach you all the fundamentals. So both the terms like cracking and packing, some of the history, much of what Alanah talked about. But also too, we teach you how to draw maps using Dave's Redistricting app so that you can understand how to actually get that would be helpful to kind of get you acclimated. We actually also have recordings of the crowd academies on our website at powercoalition.org. It is a long training. It happens over 3 days, multiple hours. And so you certainly can watch it in your own leisure. And we will also be trying to do one live. The other thing that I'm super excited about with my colleagues here on the line is that we're also going to be dropping a website with a plethora of resources that we are collaboratively working on that basically brings together the best thinking and the best resources from all of our organizations. That includes a glossary, that includes Dave's Redistricting app is one of the most prevalent tools for mapping, but certainly there are others that you can use. And so So we'll definitely be working together to drop that resource by October 20th and then grow that resource. And so it's so brand new that it doesn't have an web address just yet, but we'll make sure that we get with Peter and Alfreda to send that out to all of you guys. But the idea is that we're just trying to harness as many resources for community as possible. Also too, one of the other things that I think is important, to mention is that, again, like terms like community of interest, cracking, packing, all of these things, understanding your district. We are in the process of sending out today regional maps that just give you both the, what the House and Senate districts are in the major regions across the state. And then it also then gives you a statistical breakdown of race, race across race, but also, voter performance and other things so that you can kind of understand. And so so we try to simplify the day. So if you don't know the app, it could take a minute to kind of learn it, but we will be pushing those out and putting those on our website as well, so that you can kind of see, one, the area, but then also two, like what's the statistical data around what would it take for you to be able to actually elect a candidate of choice. One of the last things that we've been doing too in terms of protections, in addition to partnering with the amazing lawyers on the phone that we had.
30 seconds, Ashley.
I know. Okay, so this is an important last point. In addition to partnering with the lawyers, because we know that we may have to take legal recourse, we also too have asked the governor to sign a legal letter. And if we can just get out of special sessions and disasters, we can get that done. He has committed to the ideas within the legal letter, which basically asks that no district be 65% or more Black or white. That if we're actually talking about the ability to actually elect candidates of choice, that 65% seems like a fair number, that you can create both, fair districts and districts of opportunity. And so I encourage you guys to get involved in the process. Everything that happens in this roadshow will be on the record. I did check with our chairman, and Royce, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm positive it will be on the record. And everything that is on the record will be helpful if we ever need to actually go to court or take legal recourse around maps that are unfair or inherently racist. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to the discussion.
So all of our panelists are going to stay until the end. We're going to have a Q&A at the end. I want to encourage all of our participants to please put your questions in the Q&A, and we will get to as many as we can after all of our panelists have had an opportunity to speak. I want to remind all of our lawyers that we do have free continuing legal education units for you today, CLEs for you. So if you would put your name and your bar number in the chat addressed to the panelists. If just to the panelists, we will make sure that you get credit, and also to any of our social workers who are on the line. You do have free CEUs also today. So please put your name and your identifying information in the chat to those of us who are panelists, and we'll make sure that you get your credit. This is the hardest thing about this was putting it and making it into one session. We may have to have another as we get closer to this process, and I hope that all of you will come back with us when we do that. But free and fair elections where everyone feels represented. That's the goal. That is the goal. And so with that, I would like to bring Mr. Stephen Kearny into the conversation. He is the co-founder of Fair Districts Louisiana. Welcome, Mr. Kearny.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I mean, the previous panelists encapsulated what's at stake so well that I'm just going to talk about the role that I hope FDL can help play in this process. Since 2017, we've kind of been pushing various levers to try to achieve fair maps in Louisiana. We've been using our legal expertise to write and evaluate voting and redistricting legislation. And since the release of the census data a few months ago, we've been using our data analytics expertise to evaluate maps other people have created And we're in the process of authoring our own maps that we're going to propose both manually and using algorithmic methods. We've also done quite a bit of public organizing and public education. You may remember that in 2018, we put on the first ever Louisiana Redistricting Summit. And since then, we've helped put on and have participated in various webinars, including this one. And so we also plan on doing another in-person redistricting event in January in advance of the special session. So please look out for that and consider joining us. We'd obviously love to have everyone here participate in that. So we intend to be, and especially we intend our website to be the central clearinghouse for comparing maps proposed by a variety of sources in Louisiana, and for finding educational resources to help the public understand what makes a good map and what makes a bad map. So if you haven't yet, please check out our website, fairdistrictsla.org. And while you're there, get on our mailing list because we're going to have a lot to say in the coming months.
You caught me off guard,
I'm famously short-winded. I'm a data scientist. That's all I have to
you
say.
caught me off guard. I'm not used to that, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
But thank you so much. Very good information. Next, we have, okay, so I have to tell you, Michael, that I was the former general counsel for the Louisiana State Conference of the NAACP for 12 years. And I am excited that you are here. I'm excited that you're working here in Louisiana. But Mr. Michael Pernick is the redistricting counsel with the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bester. And thank you to Southern University Law Center, Louisiana Progress for convening this important event. It's really a terrific panel, and I'm honored to be included in today's discussion. My name is Michael Pernick. I'm a redistricting counsel with the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, or LDF. I have the privilege of leading LDF's redistricting work in Louisiana. Now, I want to be really clear. The redistricting stakes for voters of color across the country and here in Louisiana have never been higher for a number of reasons. Others on today's discussion have talked about Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. Louisiana has long been one of the states subject to the pre-clearance requirement under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. In fact, in every single redistricting cycle, almost every single redistricting cycle since 1965, the Department of Justice actually blocked maps that were proposed in Louisiana because they weakened the ability of voters, of Black voters, to participate in the political process and elect candidates of their choice. Now, as a result of the Shelby County decision, this will be the first redistricting cycle since the passage of the VRA in which Louisiana's voters of color will not be protected by those critically important provisions of the Voting Rights Act. This is also the first redistricting cycle since the Supreme Court's opinion in Rucco versus Common Cause, which held that partisan gerrymandering claims can't be brought in federal court. And this is the first redistricting cycle where we'll be going through this process in such a compressed timeline. We just wrapped up an extremely challenging census, which provides all of the data that's used for the redistricting process. In typical cycles, we would have had that data many months ago. In fact, possibly even last year. We just got the data a little over a month ago, and that's going to make it very difficult for policymakers and leaders like Representative Gaines, Representative Duplessis, and their colleagues in the legislature to really have time to craft maps and develop maps. It'll make it challenging for members of the public to provide feedback and evaluate and participate in the process. And it will make it challenging to go to court and try and resolve violations in maps before the next election cycle. So we have a lot of challenges that we'll be encountering this redistricting cycle that are new, that really create threats to voters of color in Louisiana and across the country. The types of threats that we're concerned about, Ashley mentioned cracking and packing. That's exactly right. We see in maps across Louisiana and across the country, communities of color have their votes diluted. And there are many ways that this happens. Cracking and packing is one of the sort of shorthand terms that are used to describe some of the common ways that we see racial vote dilution. In packing, Black voters might be packed into just one or two districts. They might comfortably elect candidates of choice in those districts, but they wouldn't have the ability to influence the outcome of elections in any of the other surrounding districts. In cracking, you see Black communities that are split across multiple districts and outvoted by white bloc voting in those districts, denying Black voters any opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. We at LDF are deeply concerned about these types of issues across the country and in Louisiana. We're especially focused in Louisiana and have identified the state as one of our top priorities this redistricting cycle. In Louisiana in particular, we're focused on every level of government, looking at the congressional map and the state legislative maps, the other maps that will also be considered by the legislature, like the Bessie map, the PSC map, Supreme Court. But we're also focused, and I want to elevate local redistricting as well, because this process isn't just happening at the state level, it's happening at the local level in parishes all across the state. Parish councils, police juries, school boards, city and town councils will all go through the same process of redrawing the maps and ensuring that population equality requirements are complied with. So we're going to be seeing this happening at every level of government in the state. And the results of this process are immensely important and will translate into whether Black voters have that equal opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. It'll affect every aspect of life for the next decade, not just political representation, but access to education, economic opportunity, housing, healthcare, civil rights, criminal justice. You know, others have mentioned the congressional map. I anticipate we'll talk more about the congressional map during the Q&A, but I'll just note LDF, we are especially focused on achieving that second majority minority district, which we believe is very likely required under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, based on the applicable legal requirements under federal law. We know it's possible to draw a map with two majority minority districts. In fact, it's easy to draw a good map with two majority minority districts. And in collaboration with our partner organizations, many of whom are on this call, we at LDF will be using every tool available to push for racial justice in the redistricting process. That includes advocacy, developing maps and other forms of guidance to submit to the state legislature or to local governments, and working with elected officials to try to achieve better maps. Our work includes public education. We have trainers who are available to host trainings on redistricting, on the process, on the racial justice implications, and work with folks on getting involved. And our work also includes litigation. LDF has a long track record of successfully challenging unlawful maps in court, and I expect that we at LDF will continue to represent voters who are interested in challenging discriminatory maps. I'll just wrap up by saying, John Lewis, he called the right to vote a precious, almost sacred right, and that is precisely what's at stake here. And I'm looking forward to working with everybody on the call and anyone who's interested in getting involved to fight for that right during this redistricting process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pernick. We really appreciate it. Lots of good information there. And I know that you guys have questions. And so please remember to put those in the chat again to all of our lawyers who would like to receive CLE credit. Please put your name and your bar number in the chat to the panelists so we can make sure that keep your information confidential, and also to our social workers. Please, if you want CEUs, put your name and your identifying information in the chat to us as panelists, and we'll make sure that you get your credit. I want to welcome Terry Landry Jr., who is he is the Louisiana Policy Director for the Southern Poverty Law Center. Terry, welcome, and thank you for your patience.
No problem. Thank you, Ms. Alfreda, and thank you, the Chancellor. And anytime, we're not physically in the building, but anytime I can come back to my alma mater, Southern University Law Center, it's just an honor for me. If you told me back when I was sitting in law school, I would be here today presenting with this distinguished and just great panel who I'm lucky to call not only colleagues, but friends. I could never imagine it. So thank you for having me. Louisiana Progress, thank you for the invite. And as a former law student, I also have to mention, I know several law students, specifically in my wife's class, who have been attending and watching this patiently. And I think that it's very important that you all are here because you are the future of what redistricting is going to look like. We're going to need young lawyers in case there is that fight that we've been talking about to support these organizations like Southern Poverty Law Center, like ACLU, and like the Power Coalition and LDF. So I just really appreciate the law students that have attended and taken time out of their busy schedules to listen in. I'm not going to be long because a lot of everything I wanted to say and has been said. I just want to say my role has kind of been different in the redistricting process because we've been more so of a coordinator and facilitator behind the scenes, assisting Ashley and the Power Coalition and Alanah and ACLU, making sure that they have all the support that they need. They do such a great job with the structure that they've established in trying to get people to represent their power at these hearings, to speak their truth and to prepare them for that. We've just kind of been a go-between between them, the community, and the legislature so that everybody is working together collectively. The groups that you see on this call meet weekly, and we are just so thrilled to have this type of participation because the community is really going to drive this home, right? Like Ashley said, it has to be part of the record, right? So we want to prepare you all for testimony, and not just preparing you to say what we want you to say, but prepare you in a manner that effectively reflects what is going on in your particular district, what is going on in your local area, not like as Michael just said, not just on the congressional or state level. This affects so many different parts of your livelihood. And so we're going to also explain what redistricting is, right? So many people, because it only happens once every 10 years, don't actually know this to it, right? And I've been doing this for a little while, but still there are still nuances that that everyday person may not know. And so that's going to be explained to you in a way to where you feel comfortable testifying before some of these committees. We know that it can be intimidating, right? We know even as someone who does it on a regular basis, it can be nerve-wracking. So we want to put people at ease and give that power to you all to put your voices on the record, because at the end of the day, if there is a challenge, your voices are the ones that are going to be meaning the most. So just a pleasure to be here with you all again. Pleasure to work with all of my colleagues on this amazing call who have said so many great things. I know y'all want to talk to them more. I'll let the experts go through the Q&A. It's just a pleasure for me. And thank you all for having me.
Y'all don't let him fool you. He is very much an expert. Do not let his modesty fool you. He knows exactly what's going on. But I have to give Terry and Randall, Representative Gaines, a Bronze Star. Both of my lawyers, my beginning and ending lawyer, neither one of them went overtime. My beginning and ending one. I'm not talking about you people in between. I'm kidding. But listen, to my panelists, I want you to know that you too are eligible for CLE. So if you would put your information in the chat, I'll be happy to make sure that you get your CLE as well. I want to say thank you also to Peter, because he's been very, very patient, but Peter's at home. And so we were taught, well, Peter wasn't raised in the South, but we've adopted him. So we were taught in the South, right, that we're going to be hospitable and we put our guests first. So Peter, we want you to come in your own way and just share with the audience, first of all, what you saw during the legislative session that made you concerned enough, not that you had to have any more prompting, but to be an active part of the redistricting process. Thank you, and welcome, Peter Robbins Brown.
Well, thank you, Elfrida, and all the panelists. I think to answer Elfrida's question first, in terms of what made me so concerned, this goes back a few years. I think just as learning about Louisiana politics, realizing how important it was. Ashley was a big driver of me understanding the importance of it and the history of it. I think that sort of some examples we can look. One of the things I try to talk to people about is, why is redistricting so important? Well, redistricting is everything, right? If you care about environmental justice, that's a redistricting issue. If you care about criminal justice reform, that's a redistricting issue, and on and on and on, right? And so when we see bills like, there's a very contentious one that's come up a couple times over the past couple of years to reform qualified immunity. And we see that the votes on that are coming very, very close, but we can't quite get it over the hump, right? You know, and you talk to some legislators, even those who voted against it, and they say, well, you know, I get it. I can, you know, I may be in line with the idea, but, you know, more or less something along the lines of my, you know, political incentives are to not, you know, to not vote for that, even though maybe I'm personally, you know, understand the issue, right? And those political incentives are largely driven by the districts they represent. You know, if you ever wonder, like, why does this legislator do this? Or I love that this legislator does that, or whatever your response is, you say, like, how do they act like that? Go visit their districts. They're almost always representing the, you know, the people in their district. And so, you know, part of the problem, and I think, you know, Royce brought this up in terms of there being a Representative Duplessis, sorry, you know, in terms of a lack of compromise, is that we have a problem in this state, federal, state, local, all of our maps, with elected officials having incredibly safe seats. And that's why really our top sort of priority at Louisiana Progress when we talk about redistricting is more competitive seats. Right now, if you look at the state legislative map, there are maybe, if you're being generous, 6 competitive seats out of 144 total seats. Of those 144 total seats, 52 went uncontested in 2019. So more than a third. And a big part of that is that people know, oh, I can't challenge this person, or I can't run, you know, if I'm not in the right party for this district, I have no chance of running or winning. So why would I even run? Then that, you know, sort of filters, that not sort of, it directly filters down to the voters, right? If they feel like they can't really make a difference in the outcome of some of these elections, then they're less likely to turn out to vote, less likely to be civically engaged in general. To Chancellor Pierre's point right at the beginning, you know, redistricting is about creating this vibrant democracy. And when we lock elected officials into these incredibly safe seats, there's really no incentive for them to come together and compromise. If anything, they're disincentivized from that because they're more concerned about sort of their extreme political flank. So that's a big part for us is really looking at how do we create some more competitive districts. We also look very closely at the other kind of, you know, the other of our two main issues on redistricting is racial proportionality. I think that which is really racial justice and equity. I think that all the rest of the panelists have certainly covered the importance of that. So I'll leave that with them. But I think what this, you know, another, you know, so how do we create competitive districts? And also this is related to racial proportionality. So we picked both of those issues partially because they're measurable. It's not just a principle of fairness and equity or, you know, any of these other, you know, sort of big ideas. But you can actually, you know, this is how you drill down and measure those things, right? We can measure racial proportionality. We can measure competitiveness. And then we can project as well, you know, what a new map would look like in terms of those two quantifiable aspects. And so just as an example of that, we've heard a lot about packing and cracking, right? So a lot of the way we look at it is sort of how do you do anti-packing and cracking? So we tried to kind of put some objective measures on that. One of the things we've seen is that really anything over about 2/3, where in a majority minority district, if more than 2/3 of that district is are minority voters, anything over that number is very likely packing. There might be some exceptions to that, but for the most part, if you see a number over that, it's very likely that district's being packed. In terms of cracking, at the state legislature level, it looks like you usually have to get to about at least 1/3 of the population in a district being minority voters for that district to be competitive. So if you see a lot of districts, especially in one particular region, that are falling kind of below that threshold, and you see it all over the state, especially in our cities and in the suburbs surrounding them, where you have all these districts like kind of in a line where you know, minority voters make up 20 to 25%. That's a good indication of cracking, right? That those minority communities have been split up among districts and kept below a threshold where they're something of a determinative voting block, right? And so then what we see is that often in those sort of, we'll call them kind of like 80-20 districts, the elected officials there are not particularly responsive, often, not always, but not particularly responsive to the minority communities in their district. And so there's, like I said, there's some ways that we can measure this and look at this and kind of dive into what does fair and equitable mean. And those are kind of the ways we look at it really are competitiveness and racial proportionality. I wanted to just kind of emphasize what we heard in terms of this. I kind of think of it as the carrot and the stick in a sense, right? That there is this stick possible in terms of the litigation that we really hope we don't have to get to, because that can take a long time and it's not a guarantee that we win. That really we want to win on the carrot side through the organizing and advocacy. That if we get people together, if we make our point, if we do it clearly, hopefully the folks who are drawing these maps will sort of see the light and do it the right way so that we don't even have to deal with that litigation side. And then I just want to close by saying that, Fair Districts is, for those of you who want to get into maps, if you go to their website, they have a local and a state side, and they already have the maps as they currently are up there. So it gives you a starting point. Like I know when I first started trying to do the mapping that I was like kind of lost because I'm like, I don't even know where to find like what we already have, or, so I think it's just for those of you who want to like figure out the mapping, that's like it kind of gets you over that initial hump to where you're sort of set up there. And then you can kind of play around with the maps yourself. And then at Louisiana Progress, we have a redistricting page on our website where we're posting our 4-part redistricting guide. Parts 1 and 2 are already up there. Part 1 is a redistricting 101, very similar to, I think, a lot of the other materials you would see from other groups. Part 2 is a glossary, kind of a deep dive on some key terms and ideas. Part 3 we'll have up next week. It's a Louisiana specific redistricting sort of analysis, looking at kind of the things that I've already been talking about. And then part 4, which we'll also have at the end of next week or early the week after, is a redistricting advocacy guide, sort of a step-by-step how you as a citizen can either come together with others or just on your own go about advocating for your redistricting goals. So we encourage you to check that out along with all of our friends and partners who have put together just like amazing material on this and really, get yourself trained up or, come to the training so that everybody can kind of help train. And sorry, final point is just on the local side, there's already all the problems that we've talked about in terms of racial proportionality, competitiveness at the federal and state level, they often apply at the local level. I point out Jefferson Parish is the most racially diverse parish in the state. They have 7 parish council members. Only one of them is representing a majority minority district. So, in a essentially at this point, a majority minority parish, you have 1 out of 7 majority minority representation on that. And that's just one example. You can find this all over the state. So just want to, again, lift up that local piece. There's already some movement in East Baton Rouge, Point Capiz, some folks are coming together to work on this. So that's exciting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. I hope that everybody is seeing the information that our panelists have been sharing in the chat. But if you didn't see it, between Peter and myself and Charlie, we'll make sure that you between Charlie and Peter, they'll make sure that you guys get all of that information, the websites and all of the information. But I want to encourage everybody. I went through that Crowd Academy that was sponsored by the Power Coalition, and it is excellent. I had never attempted to draw a map, and it was enlightening because I didn't know before attending all of the information that was available to us as citizens. Let me I want to quote this because I want everybody to hear this. It was so enlightening for me. In the last election for Secretary of State, Gwen Collins Greenup, who I pray is on this call because she is fantastic, very brilliant woman, but she was on my radio show, and Gwen said something that I'd not thought about. She said, Louisiana is neither a red state nor a blue state. We are a non-voting state. And until we can draw all of the maps that we want, and we're going to be fighting for fair maps. But once those maps are drawn, every person, every citizen has not just the right, but it is your responsibility to participate and to go out and vote for the person of your choice, but vote in every election. you have the responsibility to vote. There's some really good questions and everybody's putting them in the chat. So I'm gonna just ask this one. Maybe it's not really a question. It seems kind of like a comment, but it's kind of a question about shenanigans and how those things that, whether there are things that you've already identified or things that you can do to keep those shenanigans from being successful. And I'm gonna go and start with you, Representative Gaines. If you can tell us, and then I'll go through our panel, if there's, not just about this particular question, but it's something that people are really concerned about. And it is because of precisely what you guys have shared, that this has usually been something that's, that people don't really take notice of, because it's done, I won't say in a back room someplace, because that's not exactly true, but people didn't understand the process, and there's more information about it now. So Representative Gaines, can you talk about how some of those things can be nipped in the bud on the front end because of involvement from the community and those of us who are watching?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what the public hearing process is designed to address. Anything that appears to be unfair, manipulative, politically manipulative, subversive. During those discussions, all those things are usually vetted and are usually exposed and eliminated. Not necessarily in all cases. The biggest challenge, I'm not so much concerned with that, this is politics. There's going to be political shenanigans. There's going to be power grabs. But the process, the public process, is designed to expose that. My main concern is the shenanigans that involve minority disenfranchisement. That's my biggest concern, because because of the absence of the Voting Rights Act, we can't necessarily protect against that other than by Section 2 or lawsuits. I mean, take for instance, between 1982 and 2006, there were 1,000 discriminatory voting rights laws were blocked by the VRA. We no longer have that. So that's why we have an onslaught of discriminatory laws that's being passed. That's the ones that I'm really concerned about. And that's the ones that we're vulnerable to. And that's why we have to stop it at the state. We really have to solve the problem at the state legislative level, because if it goes through the court system, it's going to twist and wind through the court system for the next 10 years. And if someone gets elected to office based on a discriminatory voting law, they'll retire by the time the court makes a ruling on it. So that's basically what I'm concerned about. And I'll yield to my other panelists.
Thank you so much, Representative Gaines. Representative Duplessis.
Sure. Just following up from Representative Gaines, I think he hit the nail on the head. Look, shenanigans are at the heart of politics. And I mean, it's just a big game of shenanigans all day. So, how do we minimize them? We're going to start this process next week of going on a roadshow. And my intent, and I think most of our intent, will be to listen, right? We're going to present data, census-based data, to those who are in the community, but we need the community to come and speak. So we haven't gotten yet to the part where we're going to be presenting maps publicly. That's going to be when we go into session. But that's going to be the real opportunity and the real moment when the community has to step in and ask those critical questions. Why does this district look like this? Why was this change made? And get the explanations and the justifications on the record. But to stop the shenanigans, that's it's all part of the process. Unfortunately, we hope we don't have to end up in court. But we have those processes in place as well. But I would say not only can we expect shenanigans, we can expect shameless shenanigans, given the fact that we don't have the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act in effect right now. And again, we're already starting to see that in other parts of the country. So we need to be ready.
Thank you so much, Representative Duplessis. Ashley, I want to come to you. Ashley?
Sorry, my screen went blank for a minute. So
I'll come back. Ashley froze on us, y'all. I'm going to go to Alanah, and I'll come back to Ashley, if you can hear me, Ashley.
Oh, I can hear you now. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm kind of freezing a little bit. So what was that again, Alfreda?
Oh, we were just talking about the shenanigans that we can expect, and wondering what your thoughts were about how we can preempt those shenanigans.
I think that, one of the things that's also going to be critical in addition to these roadshow meetings is also meeting with your legislators in district. Sit down with them, schedule a meeting. Before February 1st, there are lots of opportunities for you to go schedule a meeting, sit down in their office, show them your maps, talk about why you do your maps that way because of the community of interest that you see for your community and your family. I think one of the other things, so that there's just deeper accountability, right? And you're building the relationship. I think the other thing is that I think we need folks to show up once redistricting starts to happen. My good friend Melissa will remember last redistricting session. I mean, it was kind of wild. And it wasn't until Norby Sharberry was on one of these other panels that we got the full story of how we had then Senator Lydia Jackson, an African-American female working with Norby Sharberry, a white male, I think he was a House member at the time, maybe son, I can't remember. But anyway, Norby was from South Louisiana, and they worked together to try to advance equitable and fair maps to try to change some of the gerrymandering in North Louisiana. They turned off Lydia's mic. They wouldn't turn her mic on. There was a lot of stuff happening. But again, that particular day, there were about 20 of us in the audience. And so the more people that they have to actually be accountable to, look to each other in the face and like see how the behavior happens when, it certainly was Senator Jackson's right to be able to speak on the map that she was presenting and why she felt like it was a map that was representative of community. And so at the end of the day, we need you to be in your face in the place. We need you to both participate in these roadshows as well as, and testify, submit your maps, but also to bring them to the Capitol because we'll need you there as well. And your voice is going to be critical in those rooms. And, and that's also one of the other tactics is that, and it'll take forever. They might not ever get to your part. They may save your part till tomorrow because they know you're not going to drive back and forth. And so you got to be prepared, to be patient and make sure that your voice is heard. You can also call your legislators out of the room. You can get a card from one of the staff and have a conversation about the fact that you drove all the way from wherever and you're their constituent and you want to be heard today, right? And so there are lots of things that you can do, and we'll make sure that we share some resources on how throughout this process you can get ahead of the shenanigans.
And Ashley, one of the things that I would encourage people to do is what we were taught in law school. By the time we get to court, our argument is already before the court, right? We've already briefed it, and so you can write to the legislature, the legislators, and let them know what your position is and ask that it be put on the record. They may not read it out loud, but it will be a part of the official record. So please do that, even if you show up. And one of the questions that has been asked, and I want to ask that of Representative Gaines and Representative Duplessis, was whether there would be a virtual option for people who didn't feel safe to actually go to the forums.
There will be a virtual option. I know that they will be streamed. I'm not certain, I don't want to misspeak as to whether or not people will be able to speak into the record from wherever they might be streaming from, but the meetings will be streamed virtually. I will check into that right now, and I will put it in the chat.
Okay, good. And just remember that even if you can't go and even if you can't participate virtually, you can write and have your position be a part of the official record, whether that's to the legislature, to governmental affairs, or whether it's to the panels that are going to be traveling around the state. In any event, you have an opportunity to do that. Let me go to Mr. Pernick. Mr. Pernick, was there something that you would like to add?
Sure. So, I want to circle back to something that Representative Gaines said a few moments ago about litigation and some of the challenges of litigation. It is not easy to litigate redistricting cases. I'm a redistricting lawyer. I've done it. I've litigated under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. These are tough cases to bring. They take time. They take resources. And they're also expensive for jurisdictions that are defending these cases. It costs a lot of taxpayer dollars to litigate one of these redistricting cases. And taxpayer dollars, frankly, should not be spent to defend discriminatory maps that violate federal law. And that's why this process is so important, to engage, to be heard. I know there were some comments in the chat around what are the legal avenues that are available. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is still the strongest tool that's available to us. The law that governs racial vote dilution it was established in a 1986 opinion, Thornburg versus Jingles. That's the guiding case that tells us when district maps violate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And there are a clear set of preconditions and factors that courts will consider to evaluate whether maps violate. And we can determine that once we have a map. We can do an assessment of a map and evaluate whether it would comply with the standards that federal courts have laid out, and urge the legislature and local community governments to not go down that road, not go down the road of enacting maps that dilute minority voters, not go down the road of enacting maps that crack and pack Black communities, not go down the road of forcing us to spend months or even years in court trying to resolve these issues, and instead do the right thing in the first instance and enact maps that comply with federal law. There are also other theories. 14th and 15th Amendment provide avenues to challenge maps in court under racial gerrymandering theories, intentional discrimination theories. So there are a variety of tools that are available to us. Aside from the racial gerrymandering piece, legislatures are also required to make sure that maps aren't malapportioned, that you have roughly the same number of voters in each district. For congressional maps, you need precise mathematical equality, the same number of voters as accurate as possible. For other districts, generally up to a 10% deviation is permitted under federal law. So there are a variety of rules under federal law that we look to govern this process, but at the end of the day, we'll be urging the state legislature to follow the law in the first instance and not pass maps that discriminate against voters of color.
It's always the right time to do the right thing, right? Alanah, I'm going to come back to you. I know I kind of went in a different direction, but please go ahead. Was there something that you wanted to add?
Oh, no, I think our panelists handled those questions beautifully. I saw someone mention in the chat about op-eds, letters to the editor, and other opportunities to be able to make these same arguments that we're hoping that you're going to be having around your dinner tables and in community meetings, to actually put those into print and actually write about them. We were really blessed to have one of our members and supporters and a very dynamic community organizer, Omari Hosang with Black Voters Matter, come together to actually issue a joint letter to the editor in the Shreveport Times. I put that in the chat just to show the ways we can have members of different generations, people who share communities of interest, actually be able to articulate these really important principles. We talked about a lot of them. Of course, redistricting being vital to our communities, redistricting being once in a decade opportunity for us to be able to make these kinds of changes. The fact that voters should be selecting their elected officials and not the other way around. That is so important. So, some of these ideas, I think that you are becoming more well-versed in. These are the kinds of things that we can write about, and you don't need to be an expert. I have to be really, really honest about something and just share. I am sure a lot of community members feel like, you know what, ACLU, you know what, Power Coalition, you know what, Rep Duplessis and Rep Gaines, this is technical. This really goes over my head. You're using language that is legal language, it's legalese, it is jargon, it is stuff that is really not accessible to me. And what we want to disabuse you of is this idea that redistricting is not something that you can understand. We all have an entry point to this conversation. Ashley spoke about a glossary of terms that we are actually going to be helping to define some of these things like partisan and plurality, majority, minority, all of these terms. These were not terms, even for me as a lawyer, I'm not a voting rights lawyer. These were not terms that I was even comfortable with. So I just want to like open that up, be vulnerable, and just share that these are not terms or subject matter that you should already have access to, but when presented in the appropriate way, it is available to all of us. And if you don't understand something, it is because the writer is not making it simple enough for you, or the speaker is not making it simple enough. Now, lawyers, our two jobs, we have to write persuasively and speak persuasively. And that means that we should be able to distill these issues for the vast majority of voters so that they have an opportunity to participate and feel comfortable.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alanah. Terry, I want to give you an opportunity, and then I want to come to Mr. Kearny.
Real quick, I know Ashley put this in the chat, but we're talking about community and everybody's asking how they can get involved. And I think that's a big piece of what she mentioned in the chat, but there's money available that that the Power Coalition is re-granting to some of these local community members to help them get involved, right? And I think it's also important to not only pay attention what's going on in your district, but watch what happens on the October 20th in Monroe if you don't live there, right? Because that also helps you prepare testimony, because you can see the structure of the meeting. You can see how it's run. You can see what other questions are being brought forward by other community members. And most of the times, Louisiana, we're very much alike than we are different, right? So some of the same things that we notice happen across the state, not in just these local areas. So pay attention sometimes to other areas, and that can also take some of that relief. That will give you some relief in trying to prepare this testimony and being out in front of this. But we're always here to support. I'm going to drop my email in the chat, so if anybody wants to email me directly, they can, to help get involved. Like I said, we've been trying to just put people together in the right places. So I'm always available that way. And then just really pay attention, because this really is impactful all the way around. Like everybody's been saying this entire call, but we cannot afford to sit at home and let someone else tell our story, because it'll dictate your future.
Oh, that was powerful. And I, just as a law professor, what I tell my students, our elected officials derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. If you do not consent, show up and make your voice heard. If you do consent, show up and make your voice heard. And please do not be embarrassed about any question that you may have or any comment that you may have. That's your right as an American citizen. And anybody else who has some thoughts about what you have to say, well, that's their problem. You go to get yourself informed and ask questions until you have the understanding where you're comfortable. And so I want to let Mr. Kearny, you're going to give us the last comments before we go to my friend Melissa Flournoy, but I do also want to remind you, we have an election that's coming up on November the 13th. Early voting starts October 30th and ends on November 6th. Go out and make your voice heard. Most of these elections are local, but we also have 4 constitutional amendments that are on the ballot, and it's important. We're going to be talking about the constitutional amendments. Oh, I forgot. That's on my radio show this coming Tuesday. But we're going to be talking about them, and we're going to dissect them so that people can make an informed decision about those. And also in every local area, there are other things that are on the ballot. For instance, in Baton Rouge area, we have 2 judgeships that are on the ballot, a city court judge and a family court judge. And also our capital area transportation system renewal is on the ballot. Don't stay home. These local races are important. They're as important or more important than the presidential election. So please show up to vote. Mr. Kearny.
All right, I have a very specific recommendation in terms of teasing out shenanigans. Whenever someone is proposing a map, please ask them to publicly share the block assignment file far in advance. And if they do that, we can tease out any shenanigans. If they're not willing to do that, then they probably don't want you to know what's going on. So I guess that's my last thing to say.
He's very succinct, if you guys haven't noticed, right? So I want to personally thank every one of our panelists. You guys are amazing. Every one of you in your own right, but together, you guys are fire. So first of all, I want to promise, and I'm not going to ask you to raise an electronic hand. I want a real hand. Will you please come back? Maybe I won't have all of you on the same panel at the same time. I may divide you up so I can give you adequate time, but please, will you come back? All right, Terry, there you go. Okay, all right. Now I see all of you. Thank you so much. Melissa, this was our fourth webinar in a series on our legislative session. We were so excited about it that we've been talking about doing something monthly. And we're going to give you more information about that as soon as we tease it out. But our goal is to give information because, you know, I'll go all the way back to be my Sunday school days to say, you know, that people perish for lack of knowledge. Melissa.
Well, I want to thank Alfreda Tillman-Bester and the Southern Law Center and NASW for working with Louisiana Progress and all this. This is my fourth redistricting process, so that lets you know I've been at this a long time. And I really do believe that we can get a second minority congressional district if we show up, if we stand up, and if we speak up. And that it's more important than ever for people to make their voices heard, because we really do want to make every vote count. Louisiana Progress has got a new guide that I think we've dropped in the chat. We're going to send out an email this afternoon that has links to all the speakers. I know ACLU is doing a training tonight on testimony. There's the Crowd Academy. There is no reason why people can't be informed and engaged and mobilized in redistricting. There are lots of organizations working together to get the word out. I think it really does make a difference to have people show up at these regional meetings, even if you're not prepared to speak or just to stand up and say you care about redistricting, because the things that worry me the most are incumbent protection, the power of lobbyists and money in drawing the maps that are drawn in secret. And so it's really important for us to be informed and participate in the process, to hold our elected officials accountable, because it really does matter across the board, from the most local issues to the state level, to the congressional maps. And the Supreme Court actually has never been redistricted in the last 40 years effectively, Alanah. And you mentioned the heartache and trying to get one minority district on the Supreme Court. So there's reasons to pay attention at all of these different levels. So I want to thank all of the organizational leaders who are here today. I want to thank all of your networks of donors and board members and allies and members and citizens, because this is the time where we really can make the voices of voters and citizens and people matter the most in redistricting. And so I just want to say thank you for your time, progress, and the Law Center will work more on a follow-up, early November monthly policy forum focused on probably the constitutional amendments, Alfreda. And then we may need to then schedule a series of these redistricting forums as we go through the process, because it's not just show up once at a regional meeting and think you've done something. We have got to turn up the heat on the legislature every step of the way until the special session in February. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with y'all. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your talent. But most of all, thank you for your commitment to making Louisiana a better state for all of our citizens. And so God bless you. We'll be in touch.
Dr. Melissa Flournoy, thank you so much, in Louisiana Progress and the National Association of Social Workers Louisiana chapter. Thank you for your support. Thank you for all of our panelists, and thank you for all of our attendees, because you've been great. Melissa, we're going to have to do that constitutional amendment one, but we need to do it within the next 2 weeks.
Okay,
So
yes, ma'am.
we're gonna do what we have to do to get that done, and we'll get information out to those who are on our mailing list so that you guys can register for that. But we'll make it happen. We'll make it happen.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you
Okay.
so much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye, everybody.
Bye.